Hello everybody and welcome to this video. So this video is the first video in a series of 5 videos I'm going to be doing where I'm going to be looking at my favorite Vietnam protest songs. I'm going to be looking at the historical context within which the songs took place. I'm going to be looking at the interpretation of the songs. I'm going to be looking at why they were so important, and also I'm going to be looking at why they are still so relevant to this day. So the first song I'm going to be talking about is one of my favorites of all time, and it is Masters of War by Bob Dylan. The first time I ever heard this song was actually a cover by Eddie Vedder, so it wasn't the Bob Dylan version I heard, but it was a brilliant version of the song, and the lyrics were just so powerful. I was blown away by it, and I went out and I found the Bob Dylan version, and it was, really connected with that version of it as well. So the song itself appeared on Bob Dylan's second album, which was called The Freewheeling Bob Dylan. And it came out in 1963, which was a really important year in the history of the Vietnam War. It's really when America began to escalate their involvement in Vietnam. If you're interested in learning more about Vietnam, I have a series of videos actually, which give a brief overview. If you don't have much knowledge of the war, then this could be a good starting point for you. I'll link the videos above there. But so in 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. There was, the leader of South Vietnam had been deposed and was murdered in a coup d'etat as well. So it was a very tumultuous time. And what was happening in 1963 was really a symptom of America becoming more militarized and beginning to use its military to dominate the world. What Bob Dylan talks about in this song, The Masters of War, is he's talking about the military-industrial complex. So what is the military-industrial complex? To put it pretty simply, it's just the people who profit from wars. It's the people who make the guns, it's the people who provide the provisions, it's the people who are sent in to rebuild the country afterwards. Whenever a war happens, the US government will hand out hundreds of government contracts to all these companies around America. Some of these companies, their primary source of income, their sole purpose for existing is to provide military equipment. So they are people who benefit massively from war happening. You can also see probably the most obvious example of this was the Iraqi war, which happened in 2003 under George W. Bush, and really just showed how the system worked. There was, underneath George W. Bush, his vice president was a man called Dick Cheney. Now, Dick Cheney had been the Secretary of Defense, and then he left that job and he went and he became the CEO of a company called Halliburton, who then got massive government contracts for the extraction of oil from Iraq when Dick Cheney was back in office as the Vice President of America. So there's all these people who benefit from it, and Dylan he's calling them out in this song. So I'm going to look at one of the lyrics here. As you can see, it says, "You that never done nothing but to build to destroy, you play with my world like it's your little toy." Again, really powerful lyrics there. And what Dylan has drawn our attention to in this lyric is he's talking about how the people who are there, they're not the people who are down in the trenches with you. They're not people who are there fighting for these good ideals. They're people who sit behind and they just build these things to destroy. And they don't have any idea or any care about the consequences of these weapons that they are creating. And they see the world like a toy. So they see it like almost like a simulation. They don't connect in with the tragedy of war and what that is. What these weapons do and what they were doing at the time was horrendous. You look at some of the stuff that happened in Vietnam, and it was horrific, and there was always the threat of nuclear war at this time as well. And it's funny because there was this idea that was coming out even before World War I began, where a lot of people believed that war had now become an obsolete thing. You couldn't possibly wage a war now because weapons were so sophisticated and armies were so large that any war that took place would cause massive casualties, and that people would not put up with such large amounts of their citizens being killed for gains for the people in power. It's never the people who are fighting on the front lines or the people who are in the war or in the country who really benefit from wars. It is those at the top. So they believed that they couldn't possibly justify the loss. The reward wasn't equal to the loss that they would receive. But, you know, as history has shown, they have used ways to, you know, justify these massive losses. In World War II, 20 million people were killed, 10 million of which were civilians. In World War II, 75 to 80 million people were killed. 30 million of them were civilians. Another 20 million were civilians who died from famine and from diseases. So another lyric that always struck me from the song was, you hide in your mansion while the young people's blood flows out of their bodies and is buried in the mud. Again, Bob Dylan is really going for that evocative language that really pulls on, you know, really paints a picture for you. And what he's really highlighting there is that it's not the older people, the people in the CEO positions who are out there spilling their blood. It's usually young people, and generally it's the poor young people who are out there who are sacrificing their lives for the profit of these companies. Within the military, the majority of soldiers who are going to be there are going to be people from poor backgrounds, because the military is one of the few options that might be available to them as opposed to unemployment. So these are the people who are seen as expendable, you know, by the people who are behind the boardrooms, you know, developing the weapons and selling them to the government and letting the government, you know, trying to convince the government that this is the weapon to end all wars. You know, they're like infomercials on kind of steroids, the way they sell these things to the governments, and then the governments feel like they have to use these weapons because they've spent so much money to buy them. So what is really interesting to see here as well is really the evolution of this military industrial complex, whereby you see that the budget for the American war in Vietnam was 8 to 9% of their whole budget was spent in the 60s on the military. 700 billion was spent last year on the military. This is now an entrenched part of American society. It wasn't inevitably going to be that. The 60s is what they were trying to fight against, this move towards industrialization. There was this fight for peace and stuff like that. The first 4 verses of the song really talk about this military industrial complex, and then the last 4 really take a very personal view of the impact that it has on somebody who is suffering at the hands of this military industrial complex, and really uses quite evocative language whereby he wishes for the man who is profiting from his death to die. It's a fantastic song that really peels back the layers behind what's really going on when war is declared. It's not as simple and as altruistic as, you know, good guys versus bad guys. There are all these vested interests behind these wars who are pushing for things, and then they're sold to us in ways that are more simplified than they actually are. So thanks so much for watching this video. Please feel free to leave any comments or any interpretations you have about the song below. I'd love to hear from you guys. And I will see you guys in the next video when I'm going to be talking about What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. Thanks again.